Ladies and gentlemen, let me be very, very clear. If the Democratic Party becomes the likes of Zoran Mamdani, who, by the way, I like, I'm not trying to throw any shade on him or anything like that, but if the Democratic Party becomes him, you have no chance. You have no chance on a national basis in terms of the presidency. In Senate seats in the House, you have no chance. You have no chance. I want to be very, very clear about that. You might have a Democratic Socialist sprinkled here and there, but that ain't what America is.
Stephen A. Smith is unexpectedly calling out the woke left these days. And I think it's all a little strange, honestly.
America's about capitalism. America's about dollars and cents. America's about an economy, a flourishing economy. Okay? And you know what it's not about? Free stuff. Somebody got to say it, so I'm going to say it. Somebody got to say it, so I'm going to say it.
Stephen A. has long been a left-leaning voice, openly backing the Democratic Party. I've seen him champion liberal positions countless times while criticizing Republicans. That's why watching him push back on his own side feels unusual. So what exactly did Stephen A. say about the left this time? Let's take a look.
Here's how bad the Democrats up. Trump is cool now. He's not just the most powerful guy in the world and just made himself like the richest. Mm-hmm. He's actually kind of at 78.
Yes.
I mean, rappers like him. Yeah. The athletes are doing, I was making fun of him jerking off two guys at one time. And now he owns it, and they're doing it.
Here's the deal. The man was impeached twice. He was convicted on 34 felony counts. And the American people still said, he's closer to normal than what we see.
Exactly.
Left. That's what they're saying. He's closer to normal. Why? Because something that pertains, when you talk about the transgender community, for example, and you're talking about the issues that pertain to less than 1% of the population, the Democratic Party came across as if that was a priority more so than the other issues.
According to Stephen A. Smith, the Democratic National Committee has been catering to about 1% of the population, while Trump zeroed in on issues that affect most Americans. And when you examine it closely, it's tough to dismiss his argument. Think back to the past 2 years of Biden's administration. What filled the headlines? Gender debates, identity discussions, and social transition topics. Meanwhile, Trump kept his attention on concerns that hit everyday life: border security, public safety, America standing abroad, and the economy. These are matters that speak to millions of voters, not just a narrow group. But Stephen A. didn't stop there. He added that this contrast reveals a broader gap between what Democratic leaders prioritize and what regular Americans worry about, raising real questions about who political leaders are truly serving in today America.
So he comes into office. Now you're talking about childbirth, citizenship, and what have you. He knows that's not going to pass the mustard, but he knows that he made that promise. So when he shows up week 1 on Capitol Hill and he says, this is what we're going to do through an executive order, even though it's going to be shot down through the courts and what have you, he's saying, I kept my promise. A lot of other things that he's going to point to that he's going to try to do, I kept my promise. Then you turn around and you look at the left and you say, what promises did you keep? Now you might know the answer to that. I'm certainly not questioning your knowledge about that at all. What I'm saying is, what resonated with the voter? What voter out there can look at the Democratic Party at this moment in time and say, there's a voice for us?
Only a small number of Americans can look at the Democratic Party and honestly say, that party speaks for me. For most people, that just isn't true. In recent years, the party has poured its energy into championing the interests of a limited group, often overlooking the needs and worries of everyday citizens. Their approach seemed obvious: cater to this narrow base, highlight their dedication to these specific causes, and hope that enough voters would be impressed or persuaded to give them another 4 years in the White House. But the strategy didn't play out as planned. Rather than expanding their appeal, the party pushed away a large share of Americans who felt ignored and undervalued. What was intended as a bold political move ultimately exposed a widening gap between the Democratic Party and the broader public whose concerns genuinely matter.
Somebody that speaks for us, that goes up on Capitol Hill and fights the fights that we want them fighting on our behalf. They didn't do that. And that's why their behinds are home, and that man is back into the White House. And they want to sit up there and talk. You look at the networks right now, they're talking about him. Look at it. This is the latest. Look at him. Here he goes again. Well, you know what here he goes again means? He's doing what he said he was going to do. He promised you he was going to do these things, and he walked into office week one, and that's exactly what he's doing. And he's saying, y'all do something about it. And when you try to do something about it, he's going to say, look at them now. Now they're concerned about these issues. Were they talking about that during the campaign? Hell no. That's really it.
Stephen A. Smith makes a valid point. In many people's eyes, Trump entered office with clear goals: reviving the economy, strengthening the border, restoring America's image abroad, and leading with a focus on the everyday concerns of ordinary citizens. And to supporters, he following through on those commitments. Unlike politicians who get tangled in ideological battles or cater to small, outspoken groups, Trump has repeatedly emphasized the issues that matter most to the broader public. Day after day, he speaks to the real challenges Americans deal with, whether it's inflation, jobs, national security, or the country's global reputation. In doing so, he has shaped his role into more than that of a traditional politician. He become, for many, a voice for the average American at the highest levels of power. To millions of supporters, Trump stands as a leader who listens, responds, and places the genuine needs of the people first.
Okay, let's be honest here. First of all, one could argue that Obama resonated more because the people chose him to be the Democratic nominee for the presidency of the United States of America, as opposed to somebody backdooring their way into that position. Let's just be honest about it. You had Biden. I know that you supported Biden. Obviously, you spoke about his mental acuity and all of that other stuff, but we all saw what we saw. Before the debate on June 27th, when the debate happened, and by the time that was exposed, you then waited 3 weeks after that before he decided to walk away, but it was too late for anybody else to get in. So Kamala Harris, who didn't resonate during the primaries in 2020, couldn't even get to Iowa, suddenly is the Democratic nominee. And then you roll up at the convention in Chicago, and everybody's like, she's a rock star. So it was like, wait a minute, how that happened? I don't know how that happened.
Aside from what he calls the Democratic National Committee woke agenda, Stephen A. Smith points to another key factor behind their loss in last year's election: Kamala Harris. Within the party, Harris was never especially popular. She had already faced multiple electoral setbacks, which led some to question her ability to win a national contest. Yet she was chosen as vice president, a move many critics argue was driven less by experience or qualification and more by gender and diversity considerations. While symbolically significant, this decision failed to connect with many voters who saw it as valuing appearances over capability. According to Stephen A., choices like this revealed a growing divide between Democratic leaders and the public, placing identity politics above the practical issues that matter to everyday Americans. In his view, this played a major role in the party's struggles at the ballot box.
So you're looking at all of those things and you're saying, yes, I voted for her. A lot of people voted for her. But in the end, we end up feeling like damn fools because we supported it. We fell for the okie doke, as they say. You know she did. If you had a primary, the likelihood is that she would not have been the Democratic nominee. And you can't say that about Trump and his side.
The major question facing the Democratic Party is both straightforward and overwhelming. Who among them has the same magnetism, charisma, and wide-ranging appeal that Donald Trump commands? Some may bring up Mandani, but his socialist-leaning agenda is unlikely to connect with most Americans, who generally prefer more practical approaches. Others might suggest AOC. However, her strong embrace of woke politics reflects the same traits that contributed to Kamala Harris' rejection by many voters, making her a risky option for a national campaign. Gavin Newsom, despite his visibility, also struggles to gain traction, largely because of broad criticism surrounding his management of California problems. The Democratic Party now finds itself in a real bind. They lack a figure who can generate genuine excitement, while still appealing to mainstream voters. Without a candidate who blends relatability, capability, and political skill, the party risks falling into the same traps and drifting further from the electorate once again.
Tip my hat to the Republicans, to the conservatives out here and what they did in this last election. Again, I did not vote for Donald Trump, but I got to tell you something. I'm not mad he won. You
That
understand?
was gonna be my
I'm not
follow-up.
mad
Yeah.
he won
Yeah.
because when I see, especially in the aftermath of the election, some of the things that transpired with the Democratic Party, you know, in an effort to manipulate the election and the vote, it really ticked me off. When you hear people talking about practical things, and then I saw folks on the left basically trying to guilt me into voting for you. It bothered me. I might have ended up voting for Kamala Harris because I didn't like how Trump acts. But what I didn't do was call him a racist. I didn't call him a Nazi. I knew Trump before he ran for president.
Yeah.
We talked on the phone. We talk at basketball games or boxing events. I knew this man. And so some of the things that were being said about him, I knew were not true. And I was saying, come on, y'all, that you got to do better than that.
Here, Stephen A. Smith points to yet another problem he sees within the Democratic Party and its supportive media outlets: their constant effort to paint Donald Trump in the worst possible light. Over and over, they've attached labels to him, casting him as reckless, divisive, or unfit to lead. The media narrative has been steady frame Trump as the antagonist, amplify his faults, and downplay anything that could be viewed as an accomplishment. Yet people who know him personally or have worked alongside him often describe a very different figure. Rather than the caricature seen in headlines, Trump is viewed by many supporters as strategic, decisive, and closely in tune with what everyday Americans care about. Stephen argues that this contrast between portrayal and perception not only shapes public misunderstanding but also reveals the partisan filter through which Trump is frequently judged. In the end, it raises important questions about the fairness and credibility of political coverage in today's media environment.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me be very, very clear. If the Democratic Party becomes the likes of Zoran Mamdani, who, by the way, I like, I'm not trying to throw any shade on him or anything like that, but if the Democratic Party becomes him, you have no chance. You have no chance on a national basis in terms of the presidency. In Senate, seats in the House, you have no chance. You have no chance. I want to be very, very clear about that. You might have a Democratic socialist sprinkled here and there, but that ain't what America is.
Stephen A. Smith hits the mark. If Mamdani is selected as the Democratic Party national candidate, it could be disastrous for the DNC. The truth is, America isn't ready for a full-scale socialist agenda, and most voters are unlikely to support policies that feel out of touch with their daily realities. Recent election results make the lesson clear: extreme ideological positions, no matter how well-meaning, risk pushing the majority of Americans away. Yet, despite repeated caution from analysts, commentators, and the public, the DNC keeps emphasizing its woke and progressive priorities. So it wouldn't be shocking if Mamdani still emerges as the nominee, a bold choice that favors ideology over broad appeal. According to Stephen, such a decision would only widen the party gap with mainstream America and could lead to another major electoral setback for Democrats at the national level.
America's about capitalism. America's about dollars and cents. America's about an economy, a flourishing economy. Okay? And you know what it's not about? Free stuff. Somebody got said, so I'm going to say it. Somebody got said, so I'm going to say it.
A majority of Americans value earning what they achieve through hard work rather than relying on government handouts or broad social programs modeled on socialism. That's why supporting a candidate like Mamdani is such a risky move for the Democrats. History repeatedly shows that socialist experiments rarely succeed. Nations that have attempted it, whether partially or fully, often end up worse off than before, facing economic decline, social unrest, or widespread dissatisfaction. Americans understand this and are wary of repeating the mistakes of other countries. So if the Democratic Party pushes Mamdani onto the national stage, it's not just a tactical gamble, they could be jeopardizing the entire 2028 election. By backing policies that most everyday Americans fundamentally reject, the Democrats risk setting themselves up for a loss they might have avoided.
That I would, even Biden, who was a terrible
That's what
president.
I was getting ready to go there, ask you about Biden. Your
I
thoughts
don't
about
think
Biden,
he was,
'cause
I
you had him
don't
as
think
your
he's a
second
wicked
worst.
man.
You had him as your second worst president. Is that correct?
Yeah, and he was lucky he got second because the Civil War is pretty big. But Biden was, and you're going to see over time how bad he actually was. Now, he's going to have an asterisk next to his name. It's going to say, well, he might not have known what he was doing. and that's a medical condition. And that might be an excuse, but boy, he was bad.
O'Reilly argues that Joe Biden's presidency essentially handed an advantage to the Republicans. In his view, Biden's 4 years rank among the most challenging in modern American history, second only to the Civil War era. From economic struggles to rising tensions both domestically and internationally, he believes the nation experienced dysfunction and uncertainty that left many Americans frustrated, anxious, and eager for new leadership. According to O'Reilly, Biden's mistakes didn't just erode public trust, they opened the door for Republicans to reclaim the White House. That, he says, is why voters turned to President Trump. After 4 years of what many saw as decline and confusion, Americans wanted strength, clarity, and stability, and they believed Trump was the candidate who could provide it. Ultimately, Stephen A. Smith, O'Reilly, and millions of voters point to the same reality: the Democratic Party's focus on woke policies, identity politics, and divisive candidates has alienated many Americans. Meanwhile, Trump's focus on core issues, security, the economy, and national stability resonated with the everyday voter. If the DNC keeps following this path, especially with candidates like Manny, they risk another major defeat. Voters have spoken, and the message is clear. That brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.